You guys should celebrate, because this is yet another AI-free video. Yes, things are still happening outside the AI bubble, and I genuinely think we should celebrate the open source developers who are still fighting the good fight, while billion-dollar AI companies are busy stealing, borrowing their work and trying to make the rest of us redundant. So, a few days ago my favorite JavaScript framework just reached version 7, and in this Monday morning review we'll look at Astro's impact on the web dev world. If you are not familiar with Astro, you are really missing out. It took the web dev world by storm back in 2021 with a very simple idea. They asked themselves what would happen if websites did not need to ship a small operating system to the browser just to render a blog post. Revolutionary stuff, I know. But keep in mind that this was 5 years ago, and the only thing we had to worry about back then is what to choose between React and Angular while arguing about the superiority of the monolith compared to the microservice architecture. I do miss those simpler times when developers were still having constructive technical discussions instead of focusing on prompt optimizations. But back to Astro, thanks to the HTML-first approach combined with some clever architectural details and a very clean implementation, Astro quickly became an alternative to the much-hated Next.js, and it ended up being acquired by Cloudflare at the beginning of this year. Cloudflare is doing some pretty amazing stuff for web development these days, but we'll get back to them in the second part of the video. For now, let's look at what the new Astro 7 has in store for us. The main theme of this major release is speed, which is exactly what you want to hear from a web framework. After years of having to learn about server components, edge runtimes, partial hydration, islands architecture, resumability, streaming, caching, bundling, compiling, preloading, prefetching, and whatever else we invented to compensate for dumping megabytes of JavaScript to the browser to render a form on the screen, it is nice when a framework release can be summarized with a very simple sentence. Your builds and your applications should be faster. Astro 7 brings a pretty serious performance upgrade, mostly because the Astro compiler has been rewritten in Rust, Markdown and MDX processing now runs through a new Rust-powered pipeline, the rendering engine has been replaced with a faster queue-based approach, and Astro now uses Vite8, which comes with Rolldown, the new Rust-based bundler. I do think that the Rust story is fascinating here. For the past couple of years, there was an immense effort to rewrite most of the JavaScript tooling in Rust for obvious performance reasons. I do believe that Rust is one of the languages which will see exponential growth in the next decade, especially in a world heavily focused on LLM code generation. High performance and security will be key aspects when people will focus less on code quality, and there is a reason even companies like OpenAI are now heavily backing the language. Back to Astro's performance, according to the dev team, build times improve by somewhere between 15 and 61% in their benchmarks, depending on the project. But when updating to Astro 7, remember the new Rust compiler retires the old Go compiler, which means Astro no longer silently patches your malformed HTML. If you have unclosed tags or malformed attributes, Astro 7 will throw a hard error instead of trying to guess what you meant. This is stricter, but much better for debugging. To understand the performance gains, the Astro team tested real sites like the Astro docs, the Cloudflare developer docs, the Biome website, the Tori website, and other large content-heavy projects. This is where Astro has always been very strong. It is very often used exactly for projects like documentation sites, blogs, marketing pages, product websites, content platforms, and other places where most of your app is HTML static content and JavaScript interactivity is sprinkled in only when needed. So while most front-end frameworks start with interactivity and then try to optimize their way back to content, Astro starts with content and only adds interactivity when you ask for it. And this is why one of the biggest changes is the new Markdown and MDX pipeline, which is now powered by Rust through a processor called Sateri. Yes, we are now at a point in web development where even Markdown processing needs a dramatic rewrite in a systems programming language, because apparently parsing headings and bullet points in JavaScript is what stops you from reaching the much desired 10x productivity. But this rewrite actually makes sense. As I already mentioned, Astro is used a lot for documentation sites, and documentation sites are basically mountains of Markdown files. For reference, the Astro docs have more than 6,000 pages, the Cloudflare developer docs have more than 8,000 pages, and Tori has more than 7,000 pages. And at that scale, Markdown processing quickly becomes one of the slowest parts of your build. Until now, Astro's Markdown pipeline was based on Unified.js and a long chain of JavaScript plugins. And while the unified ecosystem is very powerful, it is also very JavaScript, which means that, over time, your innocent Markdown file ends up going through several plugins, each one redundantly walking the entire syntax tree whether they need to or not. Another great addition improving performance is queued rendering, which was introduced experimentally in Astro 6 and is now stable and enabled by default. This is one of those internal changes that most users will never think about, but it really matters. Previously, Astro rendered pages using a recursive approach. Basically, a component rendered its children by calling the same render function again, then those children rendered their children, and so on. This is the classic tree traversal approach, which is not always ideal when you are rendering large pages and you care about speed and memory. Astro 7 replaces this with a queue-based rendering system, where instead of recursively descending through the tree, Astro uses a queue or a stack and processes nodes in a loop. The newer implementation does not even build a full list first, and it renders and flushes nodes while looping through them. The result is faster rendering and lower memory usage. But a feature I am really excited about is advanced routing. Astro started as a static site generator with file-based routing. You created files, Astro created routes, and everyone was happy. But then Astro became more capable, so it got middleware, redirects, rewrites, server endpoints, actions, sessions, internationalization, and all the things you need when your static website slowly becomes a real application. The problem is that once you add all these features, the request lifecycle becomes more complicated. You may want authentication to run before actions, you may want logging to wrap only page rendering, or you may want some requests to go to a separate backend before Astro gets involved. As a result, Astro 7 adds a new fetch entry point that gives you full control over the request pipeline. This follows the standard fetch handler pattern used by Cloudflare workers Dino and Ban, which means Astro is moving closer to the modern server runtime model where your application is basically a function that receives a request and returns a response. And, honestly, that might be the only abstraction web developers have ever agreed on. With the fetch.ts file, you can intercept requests, route API calls to another backend, run your own logic first, and then fall back to Astro pages and endpoints. If you do nothing, Astro behaves exactly like before, but if you need control, you now have it. And that brings us to caching. Astro 7 stabilizes road caching, which was experimental in Astro 6. So now you can define caching behavior in your Astro application, and Astro maps it to the platform where you deploy. You can use astro.cache inside pages, or context.cache inside API routes and middleware. You can set things like max age, stale while revalidate, cache tags, and you can also define caching rules declaratively with rote rules, so you do not have to sprinkle caching logic across every page. At this point, Astro is a mature framework which covers pretty much all your needs. On top of that, it is backed by Cloudflare, and this is where your awesome trivia of the day comes in. Cloudflare has quietly become one of the most important companies in modern web development, and they recently announced they acquired Void0. Void0 is the company founded by Evan You, the creator of Vue and Vite. As you probably know, Vite is now one of the most important tools in the JavaScript ecosystem since it powers development workflows across Vue, SvelteKit, Astro, Nuxt, SolidStart, React projects, and many other frameworks. And, besides Vite, Void0 has built a lot of other important tools to move the ecosystem forward, but the challenge as usual is money. Open source tooling is notoriously hard to monetize. Millions of developers can depend on a tool every week, but that does not automatically create a sustainable business. Sponsorships help, but they rarely support a full team at the scale required for infrastructure used across the entire JavaScript ecosystem. Void0 experimented with monetization, including Vite+, but eventually moved toward the idea of a deployment platform built on Cloudflare. That made the connection between the two companies more obvious. Void0 had the tooling, while Cloudflare had the infrastructure. So the acquisition makes strategic sense. Cloudflare gets closer to the tools developers already use before deployment, and Void0 gets long-term support for its open-source projects. We, the developers, get a better chance of having the local development, build, test, and deployment workflow become more integrated. And before worrying about vendor lock-in, note that Cloudflare is committing $1 million to a new independent Vite ecosystem fund to support community maintainers and contributors who are independent of both Void0 and Cloudflare. If you like this video, you should consider joining our community where I'm posting more dedicated weekly content. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and until next time, thank you for watching.